Welcome to the newly revamped WealthStack podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Rosic, the director of WealthStack Content and Solutions. And what better way to kick off 2023 than with the man that has had his fingers on the pulse of wealth tech landscape for years? If he's not writing killer articles, you can usually find him in a kayak, and yes, year round, in the Hudson or East River in New York. So Davis Janowski, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm honored to be here.
So lucky for me and our listeners, you get to be the first victim, well, guest that gets to participate in this new podcast format. So I'll be breaking it down into various segments, with segment number one being called Stats All, folks. So we obviously work in an industry full of numbers, stats, deviations, variations. So let's put it all into context. We recently released the 2022 WealthStack study in December, and it is chock full of data points that I want to unpack. And since we're discussing 2023 trends in this podcast, I want to get your thoughts on the number 57%. Other than being a composite number, it was actually the percentage of firms that replied to their top business objective in 2023 is adding new clients. And so what are your thoughts on how they can ultimately achieve that? And what do you think of that 57%?
Gosh, it's kind of funny that it's not higher than that to
I
me,
know.
but I guess some advisors are satisfied with what they've got. Maybe want to get more in the way of doing financial planning, getting the holistic all around assets. But when it comes to getting clients themselves, gosh, I've been bitten so many times over the last 15 years by lead gen and prospecting tools, whatever you want to call them. They all come down to prospecting and lead gen, and even a lot of the marketing now. So I don't know, a combination. The only tried and true method I've seen to building your client base is at least for steadily adding clients is having business development folks. So right off the bat, I think you have small advisors that are going to struggle a little bit more, mainly because they don't have those folks. They're going to have to use more of their time in doing prospecting. But there are a lot of technology offerings, I think, out there now that there weren't even just a few years ago in terms of just scoping out clients. A lot of advisors are now spending money on advertising and spending money with Smart Asset or Zoe, for example, to get raw prospects and leads into their pipeline anyway. Honestly, the most successful advisors I've talked to have been slightly larger, usually mid-sized to large firms that have a business development person and or some staffers under them who can really take those warm, even hot leads and do outreach. If you're a solo advisor, it's an awful lot of work to do that. There are a few new technologies out there that I think can help, in addition to, say, the Smart Assets and Zoe's, in terms of taking those warm leads, making them hot in more of an automated fashion, and also just doing prospecting. Two examples that I've written about over the last 6 months, year, one fairly recently and one a little further back, is A Identified, and that's A plus Identified. And then Catchlight is out of Fidelity Labs, and it considers itself sort of let me see if I can remember the exact phrase they use, sort of a prospecting analytics engine, basically. So you've collected some warm leads, some names, some people that may tangentially or specifically have a few characteristics that match up with something you do or you offer. You take those names, you put it into Catchlight, and then also A-Identified. Both use a lot of their public data and data sets, but they're being used by other sorts of companies to put all that into a big data lake. And these two applications can go in and cut and mesh, say, everything from pulling hobbies off of social media to their investment likes, dislikes, to what they do for a living. Identified, for instance, creates both a household profile and a professional profile for a couple 100 million people each that you can tap into. Catchlight does similar things, building profiles, but the idea is that the machine, and it's using machine learning to match up all these disparate data sets from different places, whether it's holdings, whether it's job promotions, whether it's that they own stock in the company they are in, pulling all this, bringing that data together, then providing you the ability to do outreach to those leads. And if they're already prospects, you've already met with them, come up with topics, touch points to go back to them with. And this is all done on an automated fashion. So instead of your client service people and the firm itself having to do all this manually, or you as the advisor having to do this manually, you pay these guys to do it. Those are two really promising sorts of applications I see that are going to help both small, but probably the larger ones that can afford to bring in all this new technology, test it out, see where it will go. And maybe it will come down to be cheaper and easier to use for smaller advisors and hopefully sooner rather than later.
And it seems like we're starting to see AI mature a bit more in our space as well, just moving beyond kind of the basic chatbot functions and spitting back kind of generic responses and things like that. So it is encouraging to see that we've seen the headlines of big data, but how do you make it actionable? So it is encouraging to see that firms like this are trying to be at the forefront of it and make it much more actionable for advisors.
Yeah, and it's being like embedded in stuff as opposed to, the first two big examples were IBM and its engine that had Watson that had won at chess. And when you would do an installation of that, you needed all these different analytics packages. You need people to train it, yada yada yada. Or Einstein at Salesforce, which needed other things as well. Now sort of finite pieces of machine learning and natural language processing are being embedded into technologies. So advisors don't have to have these really huge investments in the technology, or firms or providers to advisors. So yeah, it's becoming increasingly common that this is going to be embedded in stuff and you're not going to really have to even know really how it works to use it. That to me is very promising.
Absolutely. And there's this consensus across the industry that tech will really obviously be a major driver of business success over the next, say, 5 years, with nearly 3 and 4, around 74% from our studies saying that technology will be critically or very, very important. And so want your thoughts there. Agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle?
No, I agree. I think it's actually, I think success as an advisor is going to be 100% reliant on technology, because frankly, everything an advisor does now is around technology. When I first started, advisors were worried about having to, archive email and even exchange email with their clients, because, good grief, everything I've done to date has been on the phone. So every little step in the last 15 years has just added layers and layers and layers and layers of technology, such that everything they do is dependent on some piece of technology in there. So I completely agree there. Everything from onboarding, where all sorts of providers, from custodians, third parties, they've integrated with onboarding solutions that are trying to do this in a totally digital fashion. So everything from onboarding to building the portfolios to the trading, rebalancing, even things like tax loss harvesting, a lot of the added technologies, that direct indexing and personal portfolio planning, all of it is incumbent on technology these days. So yeah, it's a huge area.
And what about when it comes to kind of those larger RIA firms? Where do you see the business improvements there?
Well, one thing that I was heartened by and kind of excited about at the end of last year was both, because the first announcement came from Orion, and then Envestnet piggybacked on that, made a similar announcement. Orion uses Amazon Web Services to host a lot of its data. They have figured out a way for their own firms, and this was covered in their annual, used to be the Summit Focus, but now it's the Summit Innovation, or Fuse Innovation Summit. This year, they invited some of their top firms and taught them how to use Amazon's own tool called Redshift to be able to go in, first take in all their data, a copy of all their data, store it in Amazon, and then learn how to use Redshift to do their own business intelligence. And so that's been a huge issue for a lot of firms for about the last 5 or 6 years. I've had many advisors asking me, well, where can I get sort of a discrete business intelligence application? So I'm not just collecting all this data and putting in a spreadsheet and analyzing. And, for the roll-ups, this is even bigger because they have multiple offices, they have multiple advisors. They want to be able to compare and contrast what all those advisors are doing, who's doing best, who's got the most clients, who's got the most revenue. And then you want to compare yourself to other firms. And so this holds a lot of promise from Orion with Redshift. And then on the Envestnet side, they did a similar integration partnership with Snowflake, which is another big analytics engine that's going to allow firms to come in and take their own data and slice and dice it, look at it 9 ways to Sunday, and be able to do comparisons. Orion, for its part, though, too, already has several applications that they either built in-house years ago or acquired that do varying things, look at different slices and analyze things in different ways that they're going to consolidate and combine over time. For now, though, the sort of DIY solution to the business intelligence is going to be able for larger firms to leverage things like Redshift. So I think that's exciting too, because it's really going to be able to provide advisors insights into their own business in a way that they probably haven't had before, and be able to plan based on that instead of just guesses.
So that wraps up our Stats All Folks segment. So now I want to really dive into the meat of the conversation, because we promised folks a 2023 WealthTech outlook. So I did come with some loaded questions, so fair warning here. But with the market still kind of going sideways and we're experiencing volatility, advisors obviously need to be more productive than ever this year. Where are you seeing some of the greatest opportunities for WealthTech providers right now?
Well, that's actually a pretty broad question.
I warned you.
Yeah. Well, specifically the low-hanging fruit here, it's making improvements in automation and efficiency in the advisor's firm, their day-to-day operations. Several examples I've covered over the last few months would be Hubley. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce it where I can't remember if it's Hubley or Hubley. Hubley, Cognicore, Bento Engine, Nudge with a K, Benjamin. Most of these work with CRMs. CRMs for a lot of firms of most any size, sort of still the central hub around which most of the advisors' other technology is going to work and integrate with. And the two big players right now in terms of being able to integrate with all of these is Redtail and Wealthbox. And I think you're going to see, I think most of the providers I've mentioned have talked about wanting to integrate with Salesforce as well, and Dynamics, which is going to cover an awful lot of the very big RIA firms in particular, and being able to do that. And really it's automation of processes, process management, workflow management, document management, doing all these things in a way that you have new advisors start. This is going to handle telling them what the workflow should be and that they do the steps in the right way. And also just trigger things automatically so that advisor doesn't necessarily have to have a crib sheet on their desk with every little thing that they need to do when they onboard a client. It's going to be built into the technology. So that's something that's gotten me excited, is the profusion of new offerings that kind of come in, and you're not relying now on the CRM to do everything for you. And in fact, some of these providers provide really visually pleasing, customizable interfaces that allow you to maybe organize the way you see the stuff more easily too. So that's something that's got me kind of excited right now.
And I know this is something you and I have talked about kind of on the side, and it's a relatively newer concept. And for lack of better terms, I'm really fascinated around this idea of cradle to grave financial planning. We're seeing a shift to focus on really the decumulation phase of planning, but what does that ultimately mean for these technology players in that space? Is there anyone interesting that you're watching? Because it seems like RIAs are going to have to start adjusting their whole business plans to ultimately accommodate this.
There are several providers. Part of me worries that they might get gobbled up, but in a way, if it's a big player like an Envestnet or even an Orion or some other third parties or custodians, maybe this will make its way out to more advisors that way. But there are several pioneers in the space. And really what we're talking about is longevity planning, because as much as we all, want to complain about the healthcare system, health science has gotten to the point where most of us are living longer. And unfortunately, our pocketbooks aren't necessarily going to keep up with that on their own. So we've got to do planning such that you have enough assets. And really, most of the advisors out there now, probably the majority, right at the edge of the majority, are still working with clients who are in the accumulation phase. They're still working, they're saving, they're building up assets, building up portfolios. But when you retire, you're going to want you're going to want a paycheck, and hopefully it's something close to what you have now. And you need a way to wind down all those assets you've been accumulating over all these years. Well, the major players like the eMoneys, the eMoney Guide Pros, even the NAVA plans, they're not really built for the decumulation phase. I'm sure they're all at work building something really dedicated to doing that. but they're not really at a stage where a few pioneers are in terms of that's their only focus. The one that I've spent a good bit of time with is Income Conductor, which typically works with RIAs to do just this. It leaves off where accumulation ends, and then basically it helps an advisor work with and collaborate with the client to figure out what their retirement income paycheck is going to look like. Where is it going to come from? How to select when you're going to take Social Security, you and your spouse. So you're married. What order do you take it in? When do you actually retire? And then how do you ladder all of your assets so that you have enough based on how long you think you're going to live? They even built in integrated health data from a provider into this, so that they know if you're a white male, such and such age, heart condition, or you smoke for a certain amount of time. They have a pretty good sense based on actuarial data how long you're going to live. So you can, as morbid as it may sound, you're going to come up with a probably fairly reliable estimate on how long those assets are going to need to last, and come up with a plan for that. Another provider in that space, which works mostly with independent broker dealers, is Income Discovery. The names are similar, but they're different companies. They do similar things. They each have their own way of working, but an IBD would take that and put it out to all its advisors, and it does sort of the same thing. It's going to be working with clients to come up with that plan for you. And there's others. There's one I haven't really taken a look at, which is Income Solver from Retiree Inc. There are other approaches, and there are some of the more frontline accumulation type providers. Right Capital is one that's starting to really look at this. There are a couple big insurance providers that have retirement income tools. So there's some work going on across the industry. It's just not to the level that I think. And in fact, I've talked to some advisors who frankly want to switch because it's even more, they feel, a fiduciary practice for them. And a couple of them have found that there's such a dearth of advisors who are specialists in decumulation phase that they're going to go. And then there's other aspects to this. Big broker dealers and probably big RIA firms are going to want to kind of come up with their own solution. And so recently, Alex Murgia and Wade Fowle, both have been in the industry for a long time, came up with this thing called the RASA framework. That's short for Retirement Income Style Awareness. Mouthful, but basically it's taking several different factors: probability versus safety, which is sort of what are all your sources of income that you're going to be reliant on, that are reliant on in turn market returns; optionality, having flexibility to respond to economic developments or changing personal situations; versus commitment, being dedicated to one retirement income solution. Taking all those factors, coming up with a plan on your own based on that, based on the products that you have available, if it's, say, being put out by a broker dealer, et cetera. So there's a lot of different avenues this is coming at, but it to me, there needs to be a critical mass of advisors that are becoming specialists at this, and firms maybe having an advisor in the firm who's a specialist in the accumulation phase. So,
absolutely. And I
yeah.
laugh because randomly my husband and I were looking at our retirement account today, which I know is a big no-no right now, but I was like, oh, good. We can retire for about 3 weeks at this rate. So we're doing great.
Yeah. I know. And there's a whole lot of things that advisors simply don't talk about, even in their clients are approaching it, like long-term care insurance, which is hugely expensive and could put a huge dent in the managed assets that are available to advisors for them to charge fees on. You don't want to admit it, but it's still part of the business to be able to charge your fees and be able to do that. And so it's something that everyone's going to have to wrestle with, and the industry as a whole, I don't think, has really confronted that reality just yet.
I would agree. So I have one more loaded question for you before we move on to our next segment. Are there any other interesting firms or wealth tech concepts that we should all be keeping our eye on throughout the rest of this year?
Yeah, there are. I see a lot of things. One thing that the SEC ad rule change is going to make it possible for our advisors to have a lot in the way of ratings and reviews, things that might have been considered endorsements, which were verboten in the past. And I'm starting to see providers that are ready to step in and provide that for them. One that's really sort of already out there and kind of building a name. They've been at a few of the conferences now. It's IndieFin, and it's sort of They provide a place basically for, it's kind of like an online directory in a way, where every advisor has their own page, and there's a review and there's a rating, and it's a very interesting offering. And then there's one I more recently and still haven't finished writing a story about, which is called Amplify Reviews. And the gentleman behind this came out of building technology for doctors starting back in 2014. Because similar to advisors, doctors had a big hesitancy in having reviews or ratings of themselves on their site too. And basically what they found was that it was a plus for advisors to do that, that most people were pretty thoughtful and they weren't going to be full of bad reviews. And once the idea of it had been accepted, they came up with a way to actually do it, to have a platform to be able to support it, put them on there, and offload that from the physician. Well, they're now applying that to advisors. It's called Amplify Reviews, and there are a couple firms that now have them up, and looks good. There's a few things about like how long do you keep a review up, making sure that clients understand that they, good reviews and bad will be up there, and make sure advisors understand that that's the case. They can always address it, and eventually, maybe get a better review. But anyway, the idea that that's going to be something that drives prospecting and helps with lead gen as well. And the frame of reference I was given is that, okay, you've got two websites, and that's how you're not being sent to an advisor because of a referral. You're visiting the websites. One website has lots of positive reviews, the other website's got nothing. Which one are you going to choose? And it's interesting because I think eventually, knowing the way advisors think, everybody's going to want these reviews and everyone's going to have them up. So the idea is to find, reliable source of a platform that's going to provide these for you. And we'll see if it works or not, but I think we're going to start to see that. Another thing that's interesting to me, and it kind of is similar to this whole discussion of decumulation phase, is just advisors are going to be ever more plugged into their clients' lives. Just like we're going to have a lot more of the population in retirement soon doing, in need of decumulation planning, and that people are living longer, that opens the door to, things like dementia and making mistakes. And as people get older, they're not quite as sharp as they used to be, and falling victim to things like elder fraud. Everybody has a computer now, even older folks. A lot of people are paying bills that way. So it becomes all the easier to be preyed upon by, evildoers and criminals. So one thing I saw last year that was interesting to me is a platform called Careful, with two L's at the end. And the idea is that you create a circle of care around someone. And it could be either, a child, or say the advisor is the quarterback that suggests this application. And there will probably end up being competitors to it. But the idea is it's similar to account aggregation that most all advisors are familiar with. Careful would take in a secure fashion the credentials for all their financial accounts and things. They would not have access to those. The advisors would not have access to the credentials. The third party, Careful, has it. But once it's all set up, a certain number of people, probably children, maybe the advisor, a handful of other people, can see transactions that go across there. And if one sees where, oh, mom paid a bill twice, okay, we can go fix that. Or if mom just sent $50,000 to somebody I've never heard of, you can look into it. And that's something that's interesting. And it's nationwide. It's had a partnership with Careful last year, and then recently Cetera partnered with them to at least add them to their list of qualified providers of services, so that you don't have to vet it yourself. That Cetera vetted it for their advisors as useful.
And that honestly, it makes so much sense at this point too, to be able to see your holistic financial plan and life, and embedded with healthcare as well. Like that to me just makes so much sense. So I am very excited to see kind of where that industry and segment goes, and as things become more embedded. And this is why I love talking to you. See, learn something new every time. So I appreciate your insights on that. And I want to move on to segment 2 of the episode, another new segment called Ask Me Anything. If you can't tell at this point, I love a good pun and alliteration. So we've gone out to the social universe and asked them to submit questions that they want answered by you, and they have actually delivered. So first question we got was around advice engagement. There is a whole new category found on the Kitsis popular fintech placemat, if you will. Part planning, part practice management, somewhat consumer facing facilitation platforms. Any forecasts on how these techs are being adopted, integrated, or ultimately impacting their users?
Well, there's certainly a lot of talk about them. I can only base my opinions on what advisors tell me and what I see when I get demos and ask questions and pry sort of details out of the providers themselves about the underlying technologies and how many firms have adopted them. And that's ultimately the answer to that. And very few firms will actually share that, how many people are using it yet. One that has gotten a lot of buzz of late has been Bento Engine, which helps advisors by not only providing lots of potential touch points for advisors to speak to clients or send them content proactively ahead of time, the right moment. It uses some machine learning, some predictive analysis, and they have created all these. They've come up with lists that they keep expanding of, the simplest would be like getting in touch on a birthday or the birth of a child, on up to a few dozen of these where the technology can go and proactively do this on your behalf. They're coming up with a whole content repository that is related content to each of those that you can send out that would be customized to you and your brand, and provide you a way to, offload some of what used to be very manual content generation and or outreach, and make it, not just personal, but that it could be useful to the client. And that's something that I think is probably going to get a lot of uptake. And there are a few other providers of that. I named a few of them before. Nudge is another one with a K that I have found out recently. I think it launched in 2020. It's gotten increasingly sophisticated, and just like the word nudge, though without the K, you're nudging your clients to do things. And so the example is kind of the easiest one is to think about is you come in and you, as a client, you meet with the advisor. Okay, handshake, you are ready to go on with the relationship. Okay, I need X, Y, Z, a list of 10 things, let's say. Everybody's gung-ho about those first couple, but then people, their attention wanes and they get back to life. You, if the advisor, then have to go back and remind them, or you have to sick your client services person on them in the past. And so with Nudge, the idea is when you have that initial meeting or when you sign up for it, you say, hey, I'm going to use this new application that helps me keep track of things that we agreed we're going to do. You'll probably get emails from them, but it'll be, really for me. I'll have my name on it and all that. And it'll just help us make progress so that by the time we have our next meeting or our next milestone, you'll have done these things, I'll have done these things, and we'll know where each other stand. And that I think is something else that's interesting and could, for a very small advisor, it could take awful lot of manual phone calls and communication away from them having to do that often, and also allow, if you do have client service folks, allow them to do other things. That is sort of the promise I see of technology, and these things being also, I hate to say it, but acquired and built into other platforms so that maybe they're offered to an even larger set of advisors. But those are some of the things and examples I see coming in that vein that I anticipate getting a lot of uptake from advisors.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I think this whole category is poised for growth because at the end of the day, it's solutions and tools that are just helping advisors scale their human advice. And maybe I'm using the word irony incorrectly here, but I do think it's interesting that, human advisors serve human clients and utilizing technology to be able to do that. But these advice engagement platforms are trying to bring back that human element in a sense, at least how I've kind of been reading into it, with Asset Map and Bento engines and firms like that. They're really focusing on our people getting the outcomes that they need. And they're taking kind of, those big data concepts and research and making that information more relatable and understandable, and actually even more enjoyable to an extent through gamification, through charts, whatever it may be. So, we're seeing advisors really trying to focus, and it goes back to that theme of productivity that we mentioned at the beginning of this episode. But, where can they add value just beyond on investments, because that's really what it's been, right? So how do you deepen that relationship? So I do think this category is really interesting, and I'm excited to see where it goes. We had one more question come in, and to totally pivot concepts here, we actually had one user ask a question around fractional trading. Do advisor and custodial technologies plan to offer fractional trading in 2023? What are you seeing here?
Well, this is an interesting question, because it's already here. Fidelity rolled out a couple years ago, as has Schwab. The pioneer, the first one to really do it in a way that could be turned into sort of an automated technology offering was FinFolio, which used to be its own independent custodian and got acquired by Goldman Sachs a few years ago. They've been working to provide that to however many advisors they've engaged in their RAA side, whether we all don't really know what's going to happen with Goldman Sachs and that, but that's certainly embedded in there. Let's see who else. Apex offers it. Interactive Brokers has fractional share trading. So there's a lot of it out there. The real question, I think, and what I talk to advisors about, is client demand. And this goes for personalized indexing, direct indexing, and all the acquisitions that go around it. You hear a lot of buzz about that. And it even came up during our annual tech roundtable a few months ago, and we posed the question to a room full of technology providers and execs, and most said it was still not being asked for by clients, that the clients didn't understand it, and even a lot of advisors don't fully understand it. And that stands to reason too, because there's not really a universally understood definition of what direct indexing is, or how it should be implemented or built or applied. So you actually have several different forms of it out there, and it's not confusing to me to understand that it's not being universally asked for by clients, because no one really has a great explanation for it, or you see a lot of demand. But I think ultimately you're going to see it sort of in the back end as an available feature at every, all the custodians, all the providers that need to do portfolio management are going to have to come to grips with it.
Absolutely. Well, Davis, I appreciate you being put on the spot with these questions and your insightful answers. And we've actually come to our final segment, and what soon might become my favorite one. We're going to need to talk to Mark Bruno about getting t-shirts for this, but I'm calling it Stack It or Whack It. So in this segment, I'm going to throw out a few technologies, not necessarily WealthTech related, and you tell me if this technology should be embraced by society. So essentially, stack it, aka use it, or whack it, aka lose it. So first one I have is sweat powered technology. Obviously, you being an avid kayaker, tour guide, what if your sweat could power, say, your smartwatch? I was reading a study recently that scientists at the University of Glasgow have been working on a flexible type of super capacitor, basically, that uses sweat to power devices. So the material absorbs your sweat and then uses those positive and negative ions to generate energy. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Well, I would wonder first, what do they do about the smell? Have they come up with an answer for that? And gosh, stack it for sure. Definitely stack it. I sweat a lot. yeah, and even winter, when I kayak, here in New York and anywhere further north, you got to wear what's called a dry suit, and that if you go into the water's close to freezing, you're gonna die, and not too long. So you got to wear that, but they don't always breathe very well. It's not like
Nope.
Gore-Tex necessarily, and so they become sweat boxes. So yeah, I could really use all that extra power generated from the sweat. No question. Definite stack it.
Love it. Well, hopefully we'll see you out there then on the Hudson, is
Well,
generating some sweat power.
if I get access, I'll definitely let you know how it works out.
Love it. All right. Second technology. And we alluded to this a little bit earlier when we were talking about AI and machine learning, but chatbots and wealth management. Will chatbots be a way that robo advisors effectively and cheaply stay in touch with clients and personalize their profiles and asset allocations? Will we see brokers adapt chatbots as the best way to enhance customer engagement, between machine learning and artificial intelligence? I've been seeing, I know chatbots have been around for a while. Some are good, some are still pretty rudimentary. What are your thoughts here? Stack it or whack it?
Definitely stack it. I mean, it's here. It's like you said, you've got rudimentary chatbots just about any retail space you go to, and I think it's going to become increasingly important at all the big institutions. It's just you don't want to have to throw bodies at every sort of client hand holding you need to do, and there's an awful lot of repeatable processes, repeatable common forms, common tasks that need to be done. And so yeah, the chatbots are something that can easily handle that once they're properly trained, once natural language processing engines are at a stage where they can recognize what you're talking about when four different people describe changing a beneficiary in four different slightly ways. Yeah, it's going to be great technology. There's already a player in this space called Cognicore that we wrote about its founder, Sintu Joseph, who's got a PhD in machine learning and artificial intelligence, who has a company that's doing that right now. A big 1 billion plus RA firm, has already taken their Cognicore's technology and is trying to use it in their own practice. And it's really just like the example we threw out there. Let's say you call in and want to change beneficiary, you need a beneficiary change form. You ask that on the chat. So rather than have to actually talk to a client service rep at the firm or at the custodian, they can send you the URL directly to that form. So that's one super simple example, but lots of different processes, whether client or even like the advisor calling into the custodian for this or that. There's an awful lot of really repeatable processes that can be offloaded to technology, and chatbots are a great way to do that. And they're getting smarter and smarter. Yeah, a lot of them are still kind of hinky and don't always come up with the answer you want. But the thing about AI these days is they just keep grinding away at refining how they're going to answer, what the answer should be. And yeah, no, that's definitely a stack it. It's here to stay. And I think you're going to see it continue to go downstream to help advisors of all sizes, not just the really big firms or the big institutions.
Well, I appreciate you indulging me in, in the madness today and all my various segments. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and getting your 2023 Wealth Tech outlook and perspective. So Davis, thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Shannon. Good luck with it.
Thank you. And of course, at the end of the year, we'll have to do a wrap up and come back to all these topics and see if any of our predictions came true. So listeners, if you'd like to learn more, be sure to check out all of Davis's articles on wealthmanagement.com. He has a lot planned for this year. And if you'd like to learn more about WealthStack, our conference is coming up on May 21st in Hollywood, Florida. So visit wealthmanagement.com/WealthStack and be sure to follow us on social media. Thank you all and have a great day.